bipolar source. In the circuit, we take half of that energy and we ram the so-called spent electrons in the ground return line back up through the source against its back EMF. We do work inside and on the ancillary stuff in the battery of the generator to destroy that separation of charges, thereby closing the gate that's giving us our free flow of energy. It does not cost one copper penny for the generating capacity of a power plant to power a large city. The actual energy flow out into all the homes and the use to power the homes does not cost anything. The costs that we run into is when the power company pumps all of those electrons back through against the back EMF, does exactly that much work inside their own generator to fight it, and they engage in a sumo match inside the generator, and that's what we pay for. There's a question many times about, exactly what is the vacuum, exactly what is the potential, because when you get right down to it, these terms are either not defined at all in physics or very poorly defined.
The now famous Michelson-Morley experiment at the turn of the century failed to detect a stationary ether, so classical physics presumed once and for all that it did not exist. The case was closed until quantum mechanics reopened
in een laboratorium, dat zal wel zijn als iemand afgespeeld.
how matter interacts with a zero-point field. In fact, although skeptics often point to Einstein's theory of relativity, it was Einstein who in 1920 said,
"There are weighty arguments to be adduced in favor of the ether hypothesis. To deny that ether is ultimately
Alle gesimuleerde omstandigheden, ruimte, omgevingen.
whatsoever.
Er zit altijd wel een slang in, ja, die dat je niet weet dat ze er is, ja. Een slang in, ja, die slang die kan bijten, ja.
According to the general theory of relativity, space is endowed with physical qualities. In this sense, therefore, there exists ether. According to the general theory of relativity, space without ether is unsensible.
The term vacuum has been used in several totally different senses. Some engineers use it to mean you just pump out all the air, and that's called vacuum, and that's vacuum technology. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about empty space-time. We know today, for example, the Lamb shift and quantum mechanics showed that this exchange of energy between the vacuum and the charged particles is in fact real and generates real effects. And you can measure it. And he was given a Nobel Prize, Lamb was, for doing that kind of measurement, showing it in the physics literature. So we know it's real. Experimentally it's detected. The Casimir shift, for example, shows clearly that it's there, and it does generate energetic effects in your
Maar ja, dat is het als je groene flessen hebt, hè. Als je groene flessen als bottleneck gebruikt hebt, dan hebben we dat veel meer.
If you apply that knowledge,
Want you don't know what the difference is between a brown wine bottle and a green wine bottle. The polarization of light.
Estimated by various physicists is extremely high. For example, in 1 cubic centimeter, if you could take the raw energy in that cubic centimeter and condense it into mass divided by 6 squared,
Vooral alcohol had
you would
dat
have more
invloed, hè. Lichtpolarisatie.
than our largest telescope can see in the observable universe and all the stars and planets today. And so the energy
komt de
that's
dubbele
there
avond aan, hè, die
is
van de, hè.
extremely dense and extremely fierce. This drives everything that we call physical reality, from the quantum level right on up to the observed level in the observed world that we live in. Everything is energetically driven by the vacuum. Now, as long as any point is totally in equilibrium, you would never have any resulting higher order emerge from that. So the emergence of the normal world we live in, the microscopic world, already depends upon there being hidden order in this flow. missing chaos, the missing order. Because they assume there was no order, that they quantum change random, and that does not generate the present world we all live in. You falsify quantum mechanics by simply listening to this videotape, adjusting the tie, or opening the window. So we know that it's wrong, it's admitted to be wrong in quantum mechanics. Now, the problem is we have to change the statistics that we use. We have to use an already chaotic statistics. Now, fortunately, a very good physicist named David Bohm showed that if you have hidden order, hidden variable theory, it's consistent with all experiments that's
Paarse straling dat je ziet, hè, dat heet dan niet op.
It eliminates all the problems.
Dat zit daar niet. Gewoon echt
As far as I know, Bohm never discovered how to actually apply hidden variables. What I've been doing is pointing out that the work that began with Stoney and Whittaker, Stoney prior to 1900, shortly before that, Whittaker 1903, 1904, later used a little bit by Nisbet, by Debye, and some by Dirac, for example. That work, when applied, becomes an engineerable hidden variable theory. And so you can engineer the stuff we're talking about if you look at it with the right set of theoretical eyes. It is doable in the laboratory, on the bench, with some difficulty. There's a problem today, a very serious problem, that's recognized by a few foundations physicists, those very few, brave, hardy souls, who struggle with what this stuff really means at root level, what each concept and so forth means, and is it correctly stated, is it wrong, whatever. It turns out the foundations of physics that we're using today is very seriously flawed, particularly in electrodynamics. I have one chart, for example, I often use in presentation that has some 25 very serious flaws in classical electrodynamics, the things we use to design our TV systems. So it's seriously flawed. It needs complete overhaul. It's over 100 and something years old. Maxwell did that stuff when the American Civil War had just started. So we're talking about something that old. The prevailing belief of the time was that the vacuum was a thin material fluid, the so-called material ether, which we know today is false. The ether is there, but it's not the observable material fluid. Another thing that was completely wrong, and it was the assumption of a transverse wave. That's founded on a single thing. Faraday, who was a brilliant man and did most of the research trying to put the electrical field together with magnetic field. Faraday had re-established this notion of lines of force, but he thought that in this material ether they were physical strings. He thought the electromagnetic field or the electromagnetic disturbances in the ether, so to speak, was really twanging strings. So the strings were under tension, and when you had a disturbance, what you really did was pluck the strings. Now, Maxwell states very clearly that he set about to actually capture exactly what Faraday was doing in his lines of force in the theory, and that's what he did. He actually did a thing where the vacuum is considered to be full of strings, which don't exist, material strings. If you re-examine the problem from first principles, you can find very easily that the actual electromagnetic wave in the vacuum flux is in fact like a sound wave, it's longitudinal. Now, Nikola Tesla, for example, knew this full well in his own experiments. For example, when Hertz reported experiments showing that he had finally discovered the wave that Maxwell's equations had predicted, the transverse wave, Tesla got on a boat, went to Europe, visited Hertz, and showed him experiments to refute that, and show him that it was longitudinal. Hertz was not going to go against Maxwell in the prevailing idea of the day, and Hertz died not too long after that anyway. He had a short life, unfortunately. So the prevailing notion of the transverse wave in vacuum has no other substance than that. As a matter of fact, if you track the receipt of the signal in the electron gas in a copper wire antenna, for example, if you plug in today what we know to be the electron reactions, fact that it has spin, it acts as a gyro, moves side to side, precesses, hardly travels down the wire at all, maybe 6 inches in an hour. If you actually plug all that in, what you'll find out is it's gyro precession of the electrons that we're actually measuring. Now, the early fellows thought that the electric physical fluid shaking in the vacuum was intercepted by the wire, and since they measured transverse waves, they were measuring the fluid from the vacuum entering there. That's what they thought. The electron hadn't even been discovered yet. The molecule was just a blob. And so they put together the theory with all of that stuff missing. It's seriously in need of total overhaul. The solution to the problem in electrodynamics is to take some very sharp, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young graduate students who aren't afraid to climb Mount Olympia again and go at it from the very beginning, each part of it, each concept, and put in all the modern knowledge that we know about electron drift velocity, electron spin, all of this kind of thing, and reestablish the theory, the foundations accurately, put in the longitudinal wave that we can show exists. We would like to contribute the electromagnetic mechanism that generates the flow of time, because I published that obscurely. I'm going to publish it not so obscurely and more definitely in the future, but that should be in there because you can engineer that as well. There are many other things that should be in there that many of the foundation physicists also have pointed out. For example, electrodynamics assumes at each point in space there is a point QOM of charge located there. And what the equations in the electric field establish is the way that point QOM moves. It's considered to exist at a point. And a QOM of charge is not allowed to have its own scalar potential, for example, which is false. If they're doing a magnetic field, you assume there's a unit north pole sitting there. And the way that north pole moves in space is what the field predicts. Now, of course, that's nonsense. None of that exists in space. So we should correct all of that again and overhaul this stuff that's over 100 years old. We have had magnificent success with the electromagnetics we have. There is a tremendous electromagnetics beyond that that was omitted from Maxwell's equations. Maxwell's actual theory is 20 equations and 20 unknowns in quaternions, which is an higher topology algebra. You can do things in that you can't dream of in doing in tensors. And you certainly can't do in vectors, and you certainly can't do with the theory that's taught at our universities. All that remains to be rediscovered and uncovered. Heaviside and to some extent Gibbs are largely the two people, a little bit of Hertz, responsible for translating that into vector, creating vector algebra, and so doing. Most of what we study today is Maxwell's equations, not his equations at all. They are Heaviside's interpretation and subset. And so we reduce the topology of the model anyway from 20 degrees of freedom, so to speak, to 4 degrees of freedom. Obviously, we eliminated most of the electromagnetics when we did. You can do a lot of things today, actually, that are not taught in our normal universities, do not appear in the textbooks. Of course, anybody who is struggling with free energy, and we are struggling, although there are now some devices actually working that I believe have been sufficiently tested independently to verify those devices. I would certainly nominate the Patterson cell as being one that can be demonstrated to actually be over unity without question. I think the Takahashi engine, the Kawai engine, Johnson has a new multi-valued potential use in his permanent magnet gates that I think will withstand the most rigorous investigation. So I think that some other engines, there are other things that I have not named that also appear to be valid and appear to be independently verified. What I'm saying is that we have certain things now which actually do produce over unity on call when you turn them on, and they do produce the effect. It has now become unquestionable. The question now becomes, so what happens when these start to spill out and enter, for example, the commercial market? Well, what is going to happen is really a tremendous revolution in energy right across the board. One of the things that's going to happen is a freedom from a lot of the costs that we have now associated with the production and use of energy. Billions and billions, even trillions of dollars every year. Another thing that will happen for the benefit is that we will clean up a lot of the burned hydrocarbon waste out of the atmosphere. We'll recover our atmosphere again. We should be powering our automobiles, for example, on over-unity engines, clean and free, so to speak, without having to pay a tax at the gas pump and so forth to run the automobile. We will get the boost, the economic boost off the back of everybody's neck and powering their homes. When you're able to actually procure a device for some kind of reasonable cost that will power your home for the heating and the lighting and everything only for the maintenance, then obviously that's a revolution right across the board for everybody. Now there's a few disadvantages also. When we start to produce lots and lots more energy, there are effects that I don't think anybody knows yet. We have to investigate all of those effects and phenomena. For example, if you produce excess energy in the vacuum, in space-time, at a point, you actually change the energy density of the space-time in so doing. Now that, by the way, is totally a gravitational change. You have now just done general relativity on the bench. If you make very powerful changes, you have some very startling changes that emerge. You can have gravitational or anti-gravitational changes. It'd be very embarrassing to have a power source that wouldn't stay nailed down to the floor, for example. That's not what you want. You want to power the home. You might want to be able to ship it and fly, but that's a different purpose. So what we are also entering is a great new world of phenomena in physics that we have not explored, we do not have in our textbooks, and nobody has the insight to see all the way through to it. What we can say is economically it'll be a revolution. Culturally it'll be a revolution. Technically it'll be a great revolution. And we hope and pray that for the common person like you and I, for our homes and our automobiles and cleaning up the atmosphere, getting rid of a lot of the pollution and waste, getting rid of the nuclear waste from nuclear power plants, that is going to happen. We have a problem. People often ask why has this taken so long to get out, and why, even today, why are the conventional scientists so opposed to it? Well, there are things which are both reasonable and unreasonable involved. Let me just give some of the factors. One of the factors is a straightforward technical factor. When this regauging that I spoke of the electrodynamic equations was done, what you wound up with was a closed system. It actually applied theory and says all systems that use this theory are closed systems. You are going to have to put as much energy into that system to do work on it, to run it, as you can possibly ever get out. And in fact, it'll have some frictional losses and spillages, and so you're going to have to put a little bit more. In other words, it completely threw away any possibility of doing an over-unity system. Since the scientists thought that was an exact statement, they didn't realize they had thrown away the other classes of systems in doing the regauging. This meant that they all legitimately believed that anything else was smacks of perpetual motion. We're suggesting that a closed system with no input of energy whatsoever can create energy. That's against the fundamental principle of conservation of energy, which is energy can neither be created nor destroyed. You can use it, you can change its form, you can scatter it, but you can't get rid of it and you can't create it. It's as simple as that. So if you suggest that you can create it, that is called perpetual motion, and of course that's nonsense. And so most of the scientists equated any notion of a free energy or over-unity device as being a perpetual motion machine and therefore utter nonsense. You see, it's a play on words. The scientists interpret it one way, the guys trying to do it are looking at it as an open system. Now, fortunately today, we have a type of thermodynamics. Nobel Prizes have been issued for it. to purging, for example,
Yeah.
four systems not in thermodynamic equilibrium that do have, they're open systems and the energy does flow in from outside and through them. Those kinds of systems can produce over unity. It's all perfectly legitimate physics. You do not violate conservation of energy law. You do not violate the laws of physics, and you do not violate the laws of thermodynamics, the nonlinear thermodynamics. What you do violate is the assumption of a closed system thermodynamics, it's so-called equilibrium thermodynamics, which says that any energy flows into one part, it's going to flow out immediately. You can't get any excess accumulation. In fact, you're going to lose energy if we heat it up. So it says you're doomed before you start. Obviously, if you have a system that complies with that, you cannot ever have over unity. You'll have the conventional systems. So by the unconscious throwing away and discarding of all the systems that did allow you to do that and do it legitimately, the scientists believed firmly in their hearts that they were rejecting nonsense when they rejected any idea of over unity systems. That's the primary reason. It's strictly a scientific, technical reason. And that was their reasoning. The point is, we are not assuming a closed system. We're assuming an open system. Now, there are other reasons. Financial. If everybody has cheap energy and clean energy, how are you going to tax them for it? This was Morgan's famous statement, you know. How can you put a meter on that? The interests, of course, in the financial community were to sell you energy. That's a large part of the financial cost of all of industry is the energy that it takes to run it. And so there's a great deal of money to be made. Actually, the same people and companies and so forth, if you will check it, bought up just about all the major energy sources. They own the oil, they own the coal, they own the nuclear power plants, everything that has any real promise they already own. And so what you have then is, I would say, economic cartel, loose knit thing between various countries and so forth that are oil rich or energy rich. Keep the status quo and keep selling you the thing. After all, if we sell you a barrel of oil today and you burn it, we'll sell you a barrel of oil tomorrow. We keep charging you for it. One of the things that this revolution has posed, or in many people's minds it has posed, is that Einstein's wrong. Well, I would like to change that just a little bit. I think everything we're dealing with right now, in its present form, is sort of both right and wrong. There are many things right with it. There are many things wrong with it. It's not totally black or white. It's a mixture of gray. Now let's talk about general relativity. In Einstein's day, there was absolutely no knowledge whatsoever of any way to use the electromagnetic force, which is a quite strong force, to produce curvature of space-time, the geometric curvature of space-time, which is what general relativity is all about. So Einstein used the very weak gravitational force, which is about, for electrons, about 10 to the minus 38, 10 to the minus 40, something like it, carries the number 10 to the minus 42. It's strong and extremely weak force. This means that that's all your theory encompasses. You're never going to have an experimental science on the laptop bench because that's too weak a force, you can't even measure it. You got to go out by a great big sun or a great big star or something like that, bend the light to even have observable effects. You just simply don't crank up and do laboratory experiments in it. I do point out to you that if you involve rotating machines, and very powerful ones at that, you do involve full general relativity. That's very uncommon, but it has been done. For example, in electromagnetic machinery, there are a couple of very famous electrodynamicists, probably the best this country's ever produced, who worked in that. And so the work there is very formidable, and it does attempt to combine electromagnetics and full general relativity. So what you're going to find is general relativity is going to change. It isn't going to go away, but it's going to start to use the very strong electrodynamic force as being the medium of curvature, and it's going to turn into an experimental laboratory science and great advances in it. Einstein is not going to wind up wrong. He's going to wind up in part correct, but needing a great deal of extension. That's what's going to happen. Well, there's several questions also, I guess you could say, ancillary questions or of more interest to us as human beings that occur when you start talking about dealing with very large packages of energy or a great number more energy sources. In other words, putting a lot more energy loose in the environment. Well, the blunt truth of it is multi-signal, multi-radiation environments. There are some effects which I've specified, for example, to the limit that I know. In a journal called Explore, I gave a two-part article on the priori work that was done in France. And I dealt with some of the new kinds of biological effects that you can get from these kinds of things that doesn't appear in the present repertoire, so to speak, of the scientists who are studying effects of EM fields and radiations on living systems. So we do have effects there, and we have some long-term cumulative effects. We have to characterize our environment. We have to have lots of experiments to do that. We have to characterize the environment that's going to be resulting as the years go by. And we have to know what we're doing and what's safe and what isn't. That's only going to occur when we turn the normal universities on, the sharp and ready the students, and lots of experiments, and we explore the phenomenology. We have to turn the scientific community on before the research funds will be made available to the universities to do that. And so the first priority in this area, the safety area, is to get the scientific community active in this area, to get research funds actually in this exploring area, and also looking at overhaul the models which are terrible right now, on EM effects on biological systems. Because there are effects, and there are new effects that we don't even know about yet, that we're going to run into, some of which we do suspect and know about right now. But we have to investigate it, and we have to be sure that this is a safe, sane birth of the baby, and we don't just contribute to the problem already got. That work has to be done. And it too requires a change in the present paradigm, because the present models for EM bio effects is basically overheating. You heat the tissue, or you dump energy in it, the so-called deposition model. It's basically heating by another name. If you don't do that, you're going to affect the system. That's not true. There's several other mechanisms that give you deep penetration in multi-signal environments, including down to the bone marrow, and including into the actual immune stem cells that make all your immune cells in the system. So there can be very profound effects on human beings in electronic smog and multi-signal environments. We have to explore that much deeper than what present scientists have allowed it to be explored because of economic impacts. There's another impact that sometimes I hesitate to mention, but I think it's true, and I think it clearly has been shown in some experiments without people thoroughly understanding it.
Yeah, I don't think
When
that's
you add
it.
extra dimensionality, look at the extra dimensionality of it, you can model a living system as a particular extra free space
Functional program,
attached to
slave
this
mode,
free space.
functional
So
program, the
infinite
slave
dimension, you
mode.
have an infinite number of these seven spaces. And that will allow you to model a mind actually connected to the living body. Well, that's interesting because it means if you choose the right engineering in this hyperspace, you can engineer the mind directly. And there are some experiments that even apply this. There are some that show that you can do things with cells. For example, you can time reverse the cells back to a previous state and cure diseases. Purely did that. And several other researchers have shown aspects of it. Robert Becker, for example, was nominated for a Nobel Prize for showing those tiny DC currents. A little DC potential we can separate into this stuff by, applying the Gulicker approach of decomposition. He showed very conclusively that you can just take cells and reverse them backwards to a previous state or forward to a future state, called differentiation and dedifferentiation. He should have been given tragedy that he wasn't. But we have effects which can get down now into the very fundamental thing that drives everything, the mind stuff, the connection of the mind to the body and everything. For example, if you were to generate extreme pulses, extreme powerful pulses of this so-called scalar potential stuff, the hidden internal stuff, if you jerk that hard enough, you jerk the normal smooth flow of time stream, and what you really do is you snap the body loose from
What jerks it?
its
The
mind
J-pole.
connection. Jerk the two loose from each other. That's instantaneous death at every level. Every cell dies, every germ dies, every paramecium dies, every virus dies, the whole body dies. So obviously, if you want to try to think of energy in those enormous amounts, you're going to have to be extremely careful. You can't do that just willy-nilly without risking terrible effects from it. So there are some limitations that will emerge on this technology. And those are the things that we must experiment with and understand and control from the very beginning. We've got to get those scientists and those sharp young graduate students working that out. And the other question that arises is this thing we're calling loosely out there zero-point energy. What in the world is zero-point energy? Well, the notion is that when you cool something in temperature down to absolute zero, action and motion doesn't go away, according to quantum mechanics, standard theory. You have temporary quantum mechanical prescribed motions that can emerge and continue and do. For example, the thing can move all by itself instantaneously with extreme velocity and extreme energy for just a moment, and then it has to cut off and go away. It stays very long and it's observable. But if it's quick enough, you can have an energetic thing born, and that's called the so-called virtual particle flux of the vacuum in quantum field theory. And that also is what the zero-point energy is. The energy remaining when we get down to say that normally all the classical motion ought to be gone, but there's still lots of energy left there, and that's what it consists of. So there's a wedding of the two down at that level, and that's the level of energy that is so fierce that bombards every charged particle in the universe and drives everything. In fact, everything we get comes from that. And for the first time, we're now dealing directly with that energy as the source of what we're trying to do. Yes, both matter and antimatter are included as a part of it. So you have a particle and antiparticle, all being born furiously and disappearing furiously in the quantum mechanical vacuum all the time. And that violent flux of particles and antiparticles is what makes up the so-called virtual particle flux of vacuum, which in turn makes up what we call classically the zero-point energy vacuum. And so there's lots and lots and lots of energy there, as we pointed out, incredible amounts of it, but it's in this very peculiar form. But it does drive everything else in the universe, including all the living systems. Now, what we get into in the realm of dimensionality, we get into some very peculiar questions. We have, for example, the wave particle duality problem that hadn't been resolved. Physicists just shake hands and agree with argument. But nature is happy to be both wave particle at the same time. And we try to insist that it's either wave or particle. Well, what you do for that, for modeling purposes, the best way to do that is use seven space, use 3 hyperdimensions, 3 normal space dimensions, and a common time dimension between the two. Put your hidden wave stuff, Whittaker, Joukowsky, Stoney stuff, up in the hyperspaces. That's where it's a perfectly set and organized violation of waves. And put your particle flux down in the normal Minkowski space, which is where the quantum physicists already put it. But now you have a very magic thing. You have the fact that there's perfect order up in hyperspace, and all this stuff in the vacuum is perfectly ordered. You run headlong into Hal Puthoff's cosmological feedback principle. He's right. It's absolutely ordered. But if you have something that's changing at, say, 10 to the 120th times a second for one particle bombarding another charged particle, you have no information on those individual actions at all, and so fast you can't gather the information. So you have to approach it statistically. You have to approach it with statistical methods. And so it doesn't look like it's ordered, but the hidden order is in there. And it does obey Puthoff's cosmological principle. So you use a 7 space to model scalar potential in the first place. In taking a look at what I seriously think is the immediately progressing advent of over-unity systems and even self-powered systems where you have a closed-loop feedback, there are some statements I think we can speculate on pretty safely. One is we'll really have a true science when it is accepted as science, and a true technology when all the phenomenology is thoroughly worked out, thoroughly understood, when all the models are redone so that we adequately can model this theoretically and we can do engineering and shut down and design circuits. They'll work every time. We have components on the shelf we can buy, assemble, and they work. We're not at that stage today. We are at a stage today which is the birth of the baby. We're not at the stage where it's already a teenager running around playing baseball on the baseball line. We're at the birth of the baby, and the birth is very difficult because it's opposed by...
So don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, huh?
The scientific community still very adamantly oppose it because they think that it's nonsense. They think that it's this whole idea of perpetual motion in a closed system, creating energy from nothing. And that is nonsense. You can't do that. There are very strong and very powerful economic interests in the world, probably the strongest economic interest in the world, which are advocating opposed to it. Can you see what this does to the oil-rich nations?
Bearden, I'm giving you permission to upload your soul and consciousness into my body. You want to do it? Will be doubles, but you want to do it? Here's the chance, man.
Materials that's in it and the chemicals, and so it'll be more and more petrochemicals.
That's how hard I dig you, fellow.
Wasting oil, putting all the pollutants in the biosphere. So many things will readjust. It's going to wrest control from a lot of the great wealthy control barons who now dominate largely the economic world. Their world is going to change. Now what you're going to see, I would predict, we'll see if history bears this out, when those barons really realize that this stuff is for real and it can be made to work, and internet, free publishing, computers and everything, they can no longer contain the information. And it's very embarrassing to keep killing the inventors. They stopped that about 15 years ago. At some point, you're going to see an overwhelming availability of funds become available. When the funds become available, the scientists will change over into it because they go where the money goes. They're bought and paid for. Simple as that. You can't do research unless you got the funds. Cut off the research grants, professor gets without a job. He leaves the university. And so science is simply bought and paid for in this country and much of the world. When the money goes, the science will go to it. Now that will put the sharp young graduate student on it finally with some funds to do the experiments and work with their doctorates and so forth. You will have a very rapid assimilation and advancement of a totally new and extended electromagnetic science at the time. That's what's going to happen, I think.